Miss Kerr was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, without winning any, over more than 4 decades as a major Hollywood movie star. She finally received an honorary Oscar for her lifetime of work in 1994. Mostly in retirement since the mid-1980s, she lived for many years in Switzerland, with her husband Peter Viertel, the novelist and screenwriter. The lovemaking on the beach in Hawaii with Lancaster, viewed with both of them in wet swimsuits as the tide came in, was hardly what anyone expected of Deborah Kerr at that point in her career. Along with 𝐘𝐬𝐿 and Gene Simmons, she was one of 3 leading ladies Americans thought of as typically British, and decidedly refined and upper-class. More than once she was referred to by directors, producers and newspapers as the British Virgin. Time magazine, in a 1947 feature article, predicted she would be one of the great movie stars because, while she could act like Ingrid Bergman, she was really a kind of converted 𝐘𝐬𝐿, womanly enough to show up nicely in those womanly roles. Throughout her career, Miss Kerr worked at being unpredictable. She was believable as a steadfast nun in Black Narcissus, as the love-hungry wife of an empty-headed army captain stationed at Pearl Harbor in From Here to Eternity, as a headmaster spouse who sleeps with an 18-year-old student to prove to him that he is a man in tea and sympathy, as a spunky schoolmarm not afraid to joust and dance with the King of Siam in 𝐑𝐞𝐬𝐮𝐥𝐭𝐬, as a Salvation Army lass in Major Barbara, and even as Portia, the Roman matron married to Brutus in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. She could be virginal, ethereal, gossamer and fragile, or earthy, spicy and suggestive, and sometimes she managed to display all her skills at the same time. Miss Kerr made From Here to Eternity, even though Harry Cohn, chief of Columbia Pictures in that era, had wanted Joan Crawford in the part and had to be persuaded to accept Miss Kerr. She regarded the role as the high point in her climb to stardom in the United States, and it yielded her 2nd Academy Award nomination. Another high point came in 1956, when she was given the film role that Gertrude Lawrence had played on the stage in the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, The King and I. She played opposite Yul Brynner, who recreated his stage performance as the strutting king in the film. Bosley Crowther, reviewing the movie version for the New York Times, praised her beauty, her spirit and her English style. Her singing for classics numbers like Getting to Know You was dubbed by the off-screen voice of many Hollywood stars of the time, Marni Nixon. But her acting needed no assistance. She was nominated for another Academy Award. She also received Oscar nominations for Edward, My Son, released in 1949, Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, 1957, Separate Tables, 1958, and The Sundowners, 1960. Other notable roles came in Major Barbara, 1941, her first credited film role, Julius Caesar, 1953, and Tea and Sympathy, 1956, based on the Robert Anderson play. Miss Kerr was applauded in the Broadway stage production of the play as well. After Brooks Atkinson of the Times saw the original production, he wrote that Miss Kerr had the initial advantage of being extremely beautiful, but she adds to her beauty the luminous perception who is aware of everything that is happening all around her and expresses it in effortless style. Miss Kerr struggled against being pigeonholed by the public as somehow representing the British upper class, and was said to have instructed friends to tell anyone who asked that she preferred cold roast beef sandwiches and beer to champagne and caviar any day. But she is also quoted in a 1977 biography by Eric Braun as saying that, "The camera always seems to find an innate gentility in me." Deborah Jane Kerr Trimmer was born in Helensburgh, Scotland, on September 30, 1921, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Kerr Trimmer. Her father, who was called Jack, was an architect and civil engineer who had been wounded in World War I and who died when Deborah was in her early teens. Her aunt, Phyllis Smale, had a school of drama and insisted that Deborah and her younger brother take lessons in acting, ballet and singing. Deborah was attracted to the ballet but concluded that she was too tall, at 5 feet 6 inches. She began her acting career by playing small parts with a group that performed Shakespeare's plays in the open-air theatre in Regent's Park, London. She got her first movie contract in 1939 after Gabriel Pascal, the producer and director, spotted her in a restaurant. During the war, she read children's stories on BBC Radio. She made movies too, among them Pen of Pennsylvania, The Day Will Dawn, and The Avengers. By 1945, she was much sought after by British filmmakers and was cast opposite Robert Donat in Perfect Strangers. Her career was further enhanced when she appeared as a nun in Black Narcissus in 1947. However, after the movie was released in the United States, it was called an affront to religion and religious life by the National Legion of Decency. Miss Kerr was married to Anthony Bartley, an Englishman who had been a decorated fighter pilot during World War II, for 13 years. They were separated in 1959 and their divorce became final the next year. They had 2 children, Melanie and Francesca. In 1969, she married Peter Viertel, who survives her, along with her daughters and 3 grandchildren, according to the Associated Press. In a screen career that was launched in the early 1940s, Kerr received 6 Academy Award nominations as Best Actress for her roles in Edward, My Son, 1949, From Here to Eternity, 1953, The King and I, 1956, Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, 1957, Separate Tables, 1958, and The Sundowners, 1960. Kerr received an honorary Oscar in 1994 for her body of work in films that also included Tea and Sympathy, Beloved Infidel and The Night of the Iguana. For many movie fans, particularly women, Kerr may be best remembered for what is considered one of the all-time great romantic tearjerkers. An Affair to Remember, the 1957 film about a shipboard romance co-starring Cary Grant. The post-war personification of the British gentlewoman, Kerr was born in Scotland and began her film career in England in 1940. She had been in 10 films before coming to Hollywood to co-star with Clark Gable in the 1947 MGM film, The Hucksters. When she arrived after playing a nun in the British film Black Narcissus, she not only was preceded by her reputation as a lady but for being, in the words of Laurence Olivier, unreasonably chaste, but Kerr memorably shattered that image in 1953 with From Here to Eternity, in which she played an American Army officer's adulterous wife who has an affair with a sergeant played by Burt Lancaster. Her performance as the disillusioned Karen Holmes not only showed audiences a different side of Kerr, but the film boasts one of the most memorable scenes in screen history. Kerr and Lancaster locked in a passionate embrace on a deserted Hawaiian beach as a wave washes over them. That certainly shook a few people up, Kerr said of her image-breaking role in a 1986 interview with the Chicago Tribune. Yes, people always think I'm the epitome of the English gentlewoman, she added with a laugh, which just goes to show that things are never quite what they seem. Kerr's versatility as an actress made her unique among Hollywood leading ladies of the 1950s, said Janine Basinger, head of the Film Studies program at Wesleyan University and the author of A Woman's View. How Hollywood Spoke to Women. Generally, you had sort of archetypes. Female stars that were sex symbols like Marilyn Monroe and female stars that were ladylike like Audrey Hepburn. Deborah Kerr could do both, Basinger told The Times. But even while playing an unfaithful wife in From Here to Eternity, Kerr is dignified, Basinger said. She could give you the whole range in one performance, and that made her unique. She was born Deborah Jane Kerr Trimmer in Helensburgh, Scotland, on September 30, 1921, and was a young child when her family moved to Alford, England. Kerr, who loved to sing and dance as a child, won a scholarship to the Sadler's Wells Ballet School in London, and made her professional stage debut in 1938 as a member of the Corps de Ballet in Prometheus. I was mad about ballet, but I grew too tall, and when I eventually realized I'd never become the second Margot Fonteyn, I auditioned for a play instead and got the part, she told the Chicago Tribune in 1986. Kerr was playing walk-on parts with the Open Air Theatre in Regent's Park in 1939 when London film agent John Glidden saw the company's production of Pericles, in which Kerr had a tiny role. Kerr had no lines, but Glidden later said he was so taken with the expressiveness of her eyes and her graceful movements that he sought her out and offered to put the 17-year-old under contract. Her film debut came in 1941, in a screen adaptation of the George Bernard Shaw comedy Major Barbara, starring Wendy Hiller and Rex Harrison. Black Narcissus, a 1947 drama about nuns trying to establish a religious community in a Himalayan outpost, earned Kerr a New York Film Critics Circle Award as Best Actress. The film was shot just before Kerr arrived in Hollywood. Signed to a 7-year contract with MGM, Kerr received her first Best Actress Oscar nomination playing Spencer Tracy's wife in director George Cukor's 1949 drama Edward, My Son. Over the next 4 years, she appeared in films such as Quo Vadis, Julius Caesar, King Solomon's Mines, The Prisoner of Zenda and Young Bess. Then came From Here to Eternity. Joan Crawford was originally scheduled to play the part of Karen Holmes in the screen version of James Jones' bestseller, which was set in Hawaii in the days leading up to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. But Crawford had angered Columbia studio head Harry Cohn by insisting on using her own cameraman to shoot the picture. When Kerr's agent asked her if she'd be interested in playing the part, she reportedly told him, "They'd never consider me. You must be crazy. Harry Cohn will kick you out of the office." The next day, her agent called her and said, "You were right. He kicked me out of the office." But that wasn't the end of the matter. According to Braun's biography, when Cohn told producer Buddy Adler and director Fred Zinnemann that Kerr's agent had suggested that English Virgin from Metro play Karen Holmes, Adler and Zinnemann, Braun wrote, looked at each other in frank astonishment and echoed, "What a fantastic idea." For the role, Kerr took voice training to sound American. She also dyed her hair blonde. "I knew I could be sexy if I had to," she later said. Zinnemann once said he thought that by casting Kerr against her screen image, it would be hard for audiences to believe she was an unfaithful wife, and that would make them curious to see what happened. Kerr told Braun that Zinnemann's encouragement in playing against typecasting was a deciding factor in lifting me out of the rut of ladylike roles from which I'd begun to feel there was no exit. Kerr later recalled that Zinnemann took a long time searching for the right beach to film her famous love scene with Lancaster. It had to have rocks in the distance, so the water could strike the boulders and shoot upward, all very symbolic, she told The Times in 1982. The scene turned out to be deeply affecting on film, but, God, it was no fun to shoot. We had to time it for the waves, so that at just the right moment a big one would come up and wash over us. Most of the waves came up only to our feet, but we needed one that would come up all the way. We were like surfers, waiting for the perfect wave. Between each take, we had to do a total cleanup. When it was all over, we had 4 tons of grit in our mouths, and other places. In 1953, Kerr made her Broadway debut in Robert Anderson's critically acclaimed play Tea and Sympathy, in which she played the compassionate wife of a housemaster at a New England boys' school, who befriends a sensitive 17-year-old student falsely accused by his classmates of being homosexual. In the play's famous climactic scene, Kerr's character enters the room of the boy, whose emotional suffering has increased after a failed sexual encounter with a town tart. Unbuttoning the top button of her blouse, she reaches out for the boy's hand and sits down on his bed. "Years from now, when you talk about this, and you will be kind," she said as the stage lights dimmed. The director, 𝐒𝐿𝐸𝐽𝐿, wrote in his 1988 autobiography, 𝐒𝐿𝐸𝐽𝐿, A Life, that the play's ending produced the odd silence that comes when the audience is deeply moved. "There is nothing so eloquent and so heartening. When we had that, I knew we were going to run a long time." Kerr reprised her role in the reworked and much-censored 1956 MGM film version of the play. Deborah Kerr, the acclaimed British actress whose versatility and sophisticated screen persona made her one of Hollywood's top leading ladies in the 1950s in films such as From Here to Eternity, The King and I and An Affair to Remember, died on October 16, 2017.